Well, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started tonight. Thank you so much for participating in our first virtual Neighbor to Neighbor tour. I'm Vic Herrings, president of the Washington County Small Woodlands Association, and we are a chapter of OSWA, the Oregon Small Woodlands Association. Today we will be touring Washington County's 2019 Outstanding Tree Farmers of the Year, Barrett and Susan Brown's property. And that tour is going to happen through a combination of pre-recorded video and live question and answer sessions that will be fielded by our expert panelists. So we have about 45 minutes of video content, and then the question and answer sessions will take place between the videos. So as you're watching the video portions, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and type them into the Q&A window, and we will respond after the video ends. So a couple of housekeeping type items. If you're new to Zoom, if you move your cursor to the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button there. And if you click on that, you get a question and answer window that pops up. And that's where you can type in any questions that you have. And then there's also a chat window right next to that. And if you have any other questions, not for the panelists, any technical difficulties that you want to get to the panelists or the moderator, go ahead and type those into the chat window. This webinar will be recorded and posted on multiple websites. OSWA.org is the main one. And so look forward to that, to review it afterwards if you would like. As participants, you won't have any video or audio. So again, everything that you share will need to go through the Q&A window or the chat window. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with an introduction video from Oregon Small Woodlands Association Executive Director Jim James. And Jim is going to describe what the Oregon Small Woodlands Association and Tree Farmer of the Year is all about. So with that, we'll take it away.
Hi, my name is Jim James. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Small Woodlands Association, also called OSWA. Welcome to OSWA's first Neighbor to Neighbor Woods Tour video. First, let me tell you a little bit about OSWA. OSWA is a 501c5 membership trade organization. Founded in 1960, we are the recognized leaders in representing family forest landowners on a variety of family forest landowner issues. Our mission focuses on three areas. First of all is forestry education, and the tour today is one of those opportunities to help educate family woodland owners about a variety of forestry issues. We also represent family forest landowners at the Capitol and with regulatory agencies, and probably what a lot of members believe is the most valuable mission is the representation at the local level with our 14 active chapters. We also have a professional staff that represents our members' interests in Salem. Traditionally, OSWA would have what we call Neighbor to Neighbor Woods Tours hosted by several counties throughout the year that would be face-to-face events where landowners could go onto a member's property, learn about a lot of forestry issues, share ideas and topics, hear from experts on a variety of topics. But however, in 2020, COVID-19 has delayed all of those opportunities. So OSWA, along with our many partners, have decided to do this video series where we will tell those same stories and bring the woods to you. Today, you're going to meet Barrett and Susan Brown, who own 110 acres in Washington County. They are active OSWA members. They were also Washington County's 2019 Outstanding Tree Farmer of the Year. They will be in competition with other county Tree Farmers of the Year to be titled 2020 Oregon Outstanding Tree Farmers of the Year. This recognition program is spearheaded by one of OSWA's partners, the Oregon Tree Farm System. The Oregon Tree Farm System is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that focuses primarily on forest sustainability and certification programs. They are linked with the American Tree Farm System, which is an internationally recognized certification program. The Tree Farm program focuses on 4 primary sustainable issues: wood, water, wildlife, and recreation. And today you're going to hear about all 4 of those topics and how they're linked into sustainable forestry. Special thanks to our partners who you'll hear from today: OSU Extension, Oregon Forest Resource Institute, the Oregon Tree Farm System, Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Tualatin Watershed Council, Oregon Department of Forestry, Sustainable Forestry Initiative State Implementation Committee, our Washington County chapter, and of course, Barrett and Sue Brown. I'd also like to thank Pat McCabery, who is a videographer of this program, and he's done a great job in presenting this. Pat's with Sight and Sound Services in Welches. On today's host, Barrett Brown, he's going to give you a background on the property. He's going to talk about stand improvement, things he's done through thinning. He's going to talk about stream restoration. He's going to talk about making improvements for wildlife habitat and building trails to enjoy your forest.
Okay, I see questions already showing up in the question and answer window, so that's awesome. I would like to introduce Barrett and Susan Brown. Barrett and Susan are longtime members of the Washington County Small Woodlands Association, very active. They have a fabulous tree farm, and hopefully we'll be able to see it in person next year. And they will provide you a lot of the details about their tree farm, and I just especially want to thank Barrett and Susan for coming up with the idea here to do this in a virtual session. This was really something that they came up with on their own, and I think it's fabulous to carve some new ground here with this format. So with that, Barrett, I'll hand it off, and Susan, I'll hand it off to you two to take it away.
Well, thanks, Vic. Welcome everyone to our little tree farm tour presentation.
Hi, I'm Susan.
Yep, I'm Barrett Brown. It's really such an honor to have you all here, even though we're not able to be together in the woods, which is where we'd all rather be, I know. You know, the tree farm system and the Small Woodlands Association exists to provide landowners like us with information, tools, and personal connections that we all need to achieve the goals we have for our farm. You know, we understand that the recognition program is a big part of that, though we really feel hard pressed to feel we deserve it in comparison with the folks that have come before us. But you know, to the extent that any of this comes close, it's just a testament to virtually everybody in our family who's pitched in, and a long list of friends and advisors and coaches who right from the beginning made us feel like we had something worth working for here. So it's a testament to them. Anyway, the goals of the family forest landowner vary a lot. You know, there's no single template for what should drive a family forest management plan. And that's why this community has been so important to us, no matter how our objectives have evolved, and no matter how varied your objectives are. The information and the partners all come together here. And we'd be thrilled if this little ad hoc video substitute for an in-person tour might go some way in helping out as some of you work your land. You know, family forests contribute so much to our community and the environments where we live. We'd be proud if we played just a small part in helping that continue. So I'll share my screen here and start with a one moment here, start with a look at where we're located with the help of Google Earth. So we'll zoom into the Pacific Northwest here and the northwest corner of Oregon. And you'll recognize the Portland metro area here and see we're in the foothills of the Coast Range between Portland and the coast. And next we'll zoom into the local vicinity with Banks and North Plains at the bottom and Vernonia in the upper left. And you'll notice the East Fork of Dairy Creek Valley running up toward our white property boundary here. And we'll zoom right in on our home site sitting at the top of our hill here, which is about 1,000 feet, though the microclimate is closer to about 2,000 feet in temperature. Our about a mile-long property falls about 500 feet down to an SSBT stream, the East Fork of Dairy Creek, that you'll hear more about later. So we'll get in our Google Earth helicopter, fly around to the east here, and kind of a fun fact, many of you might have land that's been impacted by the Missoula flood events right around 14,000 years ago. And that history could tell you something interesting, I'm sure. And for us, let me turn on the view of the high water mark from that flood, which roughly tells us that all we were left with was some awesome lakefront view for a little while there. So now we'll fly around to the north, looking south down into the Tualatin Valley and Forest Grove. And we'll zoom in a little closer and really just to give you an idea how good Google Earth is at depicting the minor topography changes. You can see these small draws running through our place and the elevation change. It's really a handy tool. One thing we'll see, fly back to kind of the home screen facing generally north. And I'll give you a quick look using the historical images tool in Google Earth and go back to how the place looked when we bought it. So there's a lot in between these two images, a lot of sweat there, but you'll notice it's almost all cut over ground. Much of this is Scotch broom and berries. The area around the home site were in Christmas trees that about 7 acres there that we inherited that other folks had let go. So we harvested boughs off of those trees for we think about 100,000 pounds over the next 10 years. And we'll hear a lot more about what came between then and now. In the meantime, a little bit about how we got this started.
So that is impressive to me, I will say, to look back over that. I am in awe every time I look at what has transpired over the last 30 years. When we started this crazy endeavor, we never had any intention of owning a farm. We both had long customer service backgrounds and had this idea to run some kind of a business together. And so we were just looking at all different sorts of things and kind of simultaneously where you had this dream of buying a little 5-acre piece of property out somewhere in northern Washington County and call that home. And that, my mother-in-law was, she read the entire classified ads every single Sunday morning, and one day found a little tiny ad that said business for sale.
I'll interrupt for those below a certain age. The classifieds are a thing that came in the paper, which was a thing you held in your hand and folded out on the table.
Good call.
And these ads were little tiny 2-line printed classifieds. So I just
very good
Sorry,
perspective, because
sorry
some
to-
people,
Sorry to interrupt.
no worries, that's good point. So she identified this business for sale, called Barrett, said, hey, you guys have to take a look at this, and it made some reference to timber property or some strange thing. And after a lot of running around on the property and driving a UPS truck on it, which probably shouldn't have been done, we decided it would be a good move to purchase. And Barrett will tell you lots of stories about how things evolved, but there was a point in time where we had to decide who was going to stay home and build the house and who was going to keep working. And while I'm good with a hammer, I'm not that good. So Barrett won the arm wrestling match, and he stayed home, built the house, and he's run the farm. And I was relegated to the W-2 job to kind of make a paycheck for, paying the bills in the near term, while Barrett's work has gone to this really insanely long-term investment. But the banker that I am, I love the 6% growth rate per year of timber. That is the most reliable and steady number, and it makes me really happy. So that's kind of all I have to add from my view. It's really been some incredible hard work on Barrett's part. I've helped out to an extent, but he gets all the credit for what you see coming up here.
Oh, thanks. I've been lucky to have an adventurous wife that spent a lot of time with me on her hands and knees in the forest, trying to rescue seedlings and burrowing along like gophers. I've been very lucky.
It's been fun.
So, I think what we'll do is move on to the first video, which is on some of the thinning projects we have coming up, and a little bit about the thinning as a management strategy that we undertook to get started. So Mike, go ahead and roll that next video. We're here at the beginning of a tour through a set of thinning projects. Through the life of our farm, we're lucky enough to engage with NRCS on a number of projects. We were lucky to start really early with some young stand thinning and some brush control projects, things that we couldn't have tackled alone without their help. At this first phase, we're in about a 30-year-old stand where, as you can see behind us, we've already come in and thinned this stand, and it's responded really well. We actually have a bit of understory developed, and it's in great shape. But this same age stand, in a really inaccessible spot, it was just too complicated to access. And we'll get to compare today how this stand looks to what we're about to try and tackle on this really steep ground. Take this opportunity to introduce a good friend, Tom Nygren, who's been a kind of colleague in the small woodlands community up here and consulted with us before, who's our consulting professional forester on this thinning project. And Brad Withrow Robinson with OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension.
Thank you, Barrett, and I'm happy to be here on this virtual tour. And I was invited here to talk with you guys, or to talk with folks about this thinning project and some of the cool things that came from that. This was, as you described, a very varied stand when it was planted with a lot of different densities here. And that was going to be a problem, especially given some of the different objectives you talked about for your family to have a diverse stand. And having too many trees, having too densely planted a stand really gets in the way of obtaining some of those aesthetic and habitat objectives that people want. And so 7 years ago, you guys were able to come in here and thin this stand, allowing most of the trees enough room to grow and build up some crown again. So if we look at this stand, this is back on track for the things that you've talked about wanting to see in the future of this stand. when we go across the road and see what the rest of the stand looked like that you weren't able to get to and that you're hoping to treat again, that's going to be a lot more challenging. One of the big problems of doing any of these young stand thinnings, or also called pre-commercial, means that they cost money. They're not making any, they're not paying for themselves. And so that means for a lot of forest landowners, they're in this dilemma. They want to see the stand move in the direction they want, to have that greater diversity and structural and species diversity, and yet it costs. And the longer you wait, the more it costs.
Barrett has been a very good manager in that he's looking for these opportunities to use those resources. And he has taken advantage of NRCS's programs several times in the past. Small woodland owners that have forests need to be timely in taking those actions, and they can get the resources to help them do that, to do thinning early and to get the proper spacing on it so the trees have the space to grow.
Yeah, I mean, you just about hit my mantra, which is thin early and thin often. Early stand thinning and repeated thinning is just such an essential part of small family forest landowners getting many of the amenities that they want from forest ownership. Take a look at this stand. You can just see how it's opened up. We're starting to get a little stuff growing in the understory. Keep this in mind as we go down below at the other part of the stand, and we're going to meet up with Jessica from NRCS, and we'll talk about what the next stand is, but how in just a few years, how these two pieces have diverged. We've moved across the road and down into the other part of the stand that was not treated 7 years ago. And boy, what a contrast this is, huh? Whereas up there, that thinning had let trees stay alive and grow. As we look around down here, we see something totally different. First thing we notice is we're on a slope, which is part of why it wasn't treated last time. This is steep ground, and so it's going to take a different approach. But the consequence of not being treated that first time is that we have way too many trees. All of them are small, hardly growing, and stressed. If you look around, a lot of these small Douglas fir trees are dead. This isn't giving a lot of the things that Barrett and family are interested in. It's dark, there's some diversity in the hardwoods, but the understory is almost bare.
Well, when we have a situation like this, we have to consider two things. One is it important to do this because it is going to be costly? And how much thinning to do, and how many trees do we want to have here? What's our desired future condition for this stand? To get to that point, on this particular stand, it's going to take a lot of extra effort to get there. And that's why we call in the cavalry. We've got helpers and partners, such as the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which has a program that will help landowners do that heavy work where they only have to pay part of the cost. And so I'd like to introduce Jessica Wells, who's the District Conservationist for Washington County Natural Resource Conservation Service, and she's going to talk about their programs that will help these landowners.
Yeah, so thankfully there's people like Tom out there that are working with these local landowners and letting them know that not only do we exist, but we're here to help them. So on this project, I got a phone call from Mr. Brown, who was told about us from Tom, that said, I have a project where I need to do some thinning. It's a pretty diverse site. My weeds are under control. Can you come help? So at that point, we set up a site visit to come out and look at the project and to meet with Tom and with Barrett and to look at what state is it in, what practices do we have that can help. And with that, we have pre-commercial thinning is one of the practices that we can help with. As well as then what do we do with the logs once they're done. So on this particular site, due to the slope, the discussion was let's do pre-commercial thinning and lop and lay scatter.
You're not doing this for fun. I mean, this is going to be a messy, hard job. You're doing this because you're just barely within time that you can bring this stand by doing a very purposeful, thoughtful treatment. You can bring it back in line with what the family's objectives for the property are.
This is a steep site, so it could lead to a lot of erosion and other concerns if not done properly. So that's also where us coming in with additional funding can help these landowners to be able to do things the way they want to and have additional funds to help them meet their goals.
We only have so many different tools in our silvicultural and our forest management toolbox, and thinning is the most important one. And yeah, it's used in timber production, but it's actually probably most important for folks who have multiple objectives. And that's one of the things I really try to get over to people. You're not emulating forest industry by going out and doing a lot of young stand thinning. You're often moving away from that, because in doing that thinning, you can be choosing to leave hardwoods or other species. You can be creating variable density, so you have more light here to keep some understory shrubs growing, and a nice timber stand that you manage that way.
Once you meet with the landowner and you get their goals, their objectives, you bring out the forester that's going to be assisting, and also we will come back and meet with the contractor and make sure that we've answered any questions and they know the direction going forward, so that when they're done, they meet our specifications, we can complete our cost share, certify the practice, and reimburse the landowner for the work that's been done on their ground.
Barrett has been really good about bringing in partners to help him with these, wildlife biologists, for example, who can give him some ideas about what he can do in these other stands, and you have some programs even to help with that.
We do. We've got our conservation stewardship program as another program we have, and we've been out here right now on our environmental quality incentives program, which is EQIP. Our stewardship program these are people that have already addressed most of the resource concerns on their property, and they want to be able to give it that extra boost and enhance it. So through that program, we have different things that we call enhancements that they can put in. So they want to diversify their stand, they want to put in pollinator habitat, that they can further their objectives and goals, and use that program to support that.
And we haven't mentioned it yet, but there's another important objective here, particularly for Barrett, and that's recreation opportunities, because Barrett is really an expert on trails. He has ideas about how this can be better improved for recreation opportunities. And you can do that with some of the cultural opportunities with the vegetation.
So we're here in a 40-year-old stand to continue our thinning discussion. It's obviously beautiful in here now. We started with some very early steps to get it here. So we were in here at about age 12, 13, with a pre-commercial thin, and these were green limbs to the ground and almost like older looking Christmas trees, to give you some idea. And those were pre-commercially thinned and left. And that set us up for the next entry, also a thinning entry, to actually be a productive commercial thin. What we benefit from today of not only being lucky enough to have a really productive site, really high site ground, but from the way we benefit from these strategic thinning operations supported by a really strong management plan right off the bat, is we have options. We have options for doing a lot in the habitat space here. We have obviously recreation values we can generate at a high rate. All the while, we've got a really productive investment here on the ground as well.
So this combination of getting in there early, kept your options open, didn't force your hand, you did your thinning in a timely manner. And off here to my side, there's this tree that has a beam of light on it. It's a really good example of what you accomplished by doing that. If we look at that tree, we can see that you have kept a really good green crown. It's that amount of green crown that drives the growth of the tree. And that leads to, tree growth, which is timber, but it also leads to tree health. That tree there with that light on it probably has 35, maybe 40% crown, which sets that tree up to never miss a beat when you did the thinning, and also means that this whole stand, which averages something about that, is really stable. Your two-step thinning freed you up and gave you a very vigorous and stable stand, and you can see that by that crown. And so a stand like this is it's like putty in your hands now. You can mold this to go so many more different directions than if you had missed that thinning and you were doing a rescue commercial thinning and you're saying, I only dare do so much or it might fall over. Tom, what comes to your mind?
Same thing. You expressed it very well, Brad, and particularly emphasize the fact that you've got the vigorous understory of different types of forbs and small shrubs, which provides habitats for a lot of different creatures. So for a landowner that has multiple objectives, this fits in very well. And something else too, as I look around this stand, I see that, well, it doesn't just keep going. It's adjacent to other stands. You've got a small hardwood stand over there, another hardwood patch over here. So you've got that kind of spatial diversity of different types of species, as well as this structural diversity that these large trees are giving you that you don't have in many other parts of your property.
One thing I want to emphasize, especially to early woodland owners or young families who are just getting started, you can look at this with quite a bit of envy, like somehow this just occurred and you could never get there. But really this is the benefit of just small decisions made early. And so use your imagination about what time and good decision making and a good expert consultation can get you.
This is not a shabby investment. You have high quality timber stand here that is consistent with your other values, even while you recreate it and you do habitat. Tom, I mean, we're growing value here, right?
That's right, and it's low risk value. I mean, it's not like the stock market where it goes way up one day and way down the next day.
This is a 25-year-old stand that in a number of ways, several differences here, different characteristics in this stand. We planted with a pretty thoughtful spacing in 1995 with a really good genetically improved seedling. NRCS, once again, is able to partner with us on a cost share project for a stand and kind of diversity improvement thinning.
And it's interesting in this stand to see like the diversity of species in here in this stand that have come in as volunteers after the planting. The maple, the nice big red cedar there, and other species. So it's kind of evolved a little bit differently than those denser stands we looked at on the hillside.
You can see this canopy is definitely starting to close over. It's starting to darken in here, which is really going to kind of choke off the complexity and diversity. And we're coming along at a time when we can actually shape this from a diversity, complexity, understory standpoint, and it should respond really well. We should be able to have a good result here.
I think so. Like you both mentioned, the stand is diverse. So as the prescription is being made and as they're coming in to remove trees, they're going to not only look for good, healthy ones, they're going to look for what trees can we leave to keep the diversity that's already here. This
would be a great opportunity for on the ground wood. We're going to do a lop and scatter approach. But in a lot of these areas, hopefully every few acres, we're going to have a really substantial habitat piles, engineered structures that will tend to mimic large wood. It's another benefit from a thinning operation like this and this kind of partnership. We can achieve these habitat outcomes and improve the stand at the same time.
Another partnership that we've been able to work with and isn't here today was Department of Forestry. So they have some stewardship foresters that can also come out to sites and help work with objectives and explaining forest practice rules and setbacks. So that's another great group to get involved with.
True. Our stewardship foresters over the years have had boots on the ground here as much as anybody.
Welcome, Barrett. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Clossy. I'm Director of Forestry with the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and I'm going to be the question and answer moderator, and we got some good ones. The first one, I got to say, why does the studio have such an echo? And I chose to answer this one live because we're not in a studio, folks. We're doing this from our living rooms or our home offices, and we don't have that kind of stuff. So anyway, bear with us. Also want to apologize that the video is a little choppy, but that's about bandwidth in Zoom right now. It was awesome this afternoon. So as we move on, maybe the further videos will be better. But one thing you need to learn about internet use is 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night is the highest internet use these days because everybody's on it. So anyway, we got some good questions though. So this one is probably for Barrett. How do you deal with the slash to reduce the fire risk? Of course, fire is on everybody's mind right now. So what do you do, especially on the pre-commercial where it seems like there would be a lot of slash?
Right. Well, what comes to mind here, you know, I'd have to start with our first pre-commercial thinning back in 95 of that 12-year-old stand where there were, like I described earlier, green limbs all the way to the ground. And it was overly dense and when it was planted and not managed generally otherwise. But we went in there at a time when that pre-commercial thinning was pretty popular. And when that project was done, it was chest deep in brown needles and limbs as far as the eye could see. And I did not sleep soundly for 6 or 7 years after that. That was a daunting thing to look at from a fuel standpoint. In this case, we're going to be thinning in some pretty dense, tall stands without much crown. And those stems are going to be scattered strategically. And there's not going to be that kind of depth in that uniform blanket of high energy content fuels. We're also going to be using a decent percentage of those to create those habitat piles and of various types. So that's part of the investment that's really been made possible by the NRCS partnership.
All right. So the good answer. Next question is for Jessica, speaking of NRCS partnership. Do you have to pay back this cost share? Is this a loan or how does it work? You mentioned the programs, but I'm interested in, do we have to pay it back?
You don't have to pay it back. So the way things are set up is you agree to do things to a certain specification. You pay for the work initially. You call us when it's completed and we can certify that you did it as you agreed. And then we can reimburse you to a set rate. So you'll know ahead of time that if you do this many acres, here's the rate you'll receive. We try to do it somewhere in the 50 to 75% of the total cost. It's regional, so some things you'll get more money for, some things you may get less.
All right. And if the landowner does their own work, they keep all the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Okay. So this one is for Brad, and it kind of, or Barrett might want to chime in too, or even Tom. Tom is, I believe, available by phone now. So we'll let Brad do this one, and then we'll ask another one of Tom. So how do you know how many trees to cut and how many to leave without having your trees blow down?
Wow. Well, there's a couple factors there. First is just what you're asking about, the question of density. And we have years of forest research that has led to tables and information that we can use that tells us something about how much competition and therefore how much competition is happening, and gives us some insight into the vigor and health of the tree that is generally reflected in crown height that we talked about. And we have a publication, EM 9206, which is called Competition and Density in Woodland Stands, that gives you some numbers that you can kind of work through, that tells you what level of competition, which is sort of a proxy for wind firmness. But the key thing is doing it in a timely manner before they get overly stressed. You're trying to do the thinnings to keep a deep enough crown. And so those tables are very helpful if you do some work and do some measurements in the field. The other part of it has to do with the landscape. And, you know, different parts of the landscape are going to be affected by the wind quite differently. And so two identical stands on different parts of the landscape are going to be impacted by wind differently. So there's also some on the ground experience. Your consulting forester or loggers would give you some insight on that as well. So, and then there's luck. You get a snowstorm that year, good thinning, and you get a heavy sticky snow, and you know, even a well-calculated thinning has some risk involved to it. So those three different factors, some we know more about. We know a lot about how trees grow and their response. The others, you know, it's a little more art, figuring out how they interact.
All right. Are you there, Tom?
I'm here, Mike.
You're there. Great. Awesome the way this technology stuff works. So this is a question for you. In getting advice, which organizations would you suggest people start with?
Well, we've talked about several of those organizations already. Of course, the Stewardship Foresters with the Oregon Department of Forestry is a good place to start because they are the ones that are responsible for providing that service all across the state. There's also those who provide assistance, such as NRCS. And those would be, once you've identified an objective and you have something you want to do, you can talk to NRCS folks and see if there's any help that they can get. In Washington County, we are fortunate to have the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, which also provides assistance to small woodland owners. And Brandy Safel is the conservation specialist there, and she's a good one to talk to. Once you have really want to get into the weeds on it and determine more in-depth specific practices and things you want to do and are ready to start lining up the work, finding contractors and things like that, it's very helpful to get a consulting forester to help you do that.
All right. I would totally agree with that. Excellent. So I have one more. Go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in, Mike. Or if you weren't able to keep up with Tom's encyclopedic knowledge there, just join your county woodlands association and you will encounter every one of those groups, right, at least in Washington County and the other more active chapters. That's your path of least resistance, right, to meet folks like Tom and the folks he described.
Good. And I'll also put in an OFRI plug here. We have a publication called the Family Forest Resource Guide that Julie Woodward put together. And maybe Julie can type that in the chat. She's manning chat for us. And it's available for free. And it not only lists them all, but it tells you what they do and the phone numbers. And then on knowyourforest.org, you can actually go to the county page and find out who all those people are in your county. So there's some cool stuff. I'm going to have to stop us here to keep us on schedule, but I really appreciate you panelists, and I'm going to ask everyone but Barrett to go quiet, and he's going to introduce the next section, which is on stream restoration.
Sure. So we, like I mentioned earlier, we have about 1,000 feet of frontage, maybe closer to a quarter mile, on a very important SSBT, salmon, steelhead, and bull trout designated stream that a few years ago spawned snorkeled some very positive numbers for resident fingerlings, coho salmon. And we just became very interested in that project and ended up in conversations about a possible multi-landowner restoration project, and we've got some great video here to show more about that.
So if I were to look at East Fork Dairy Creek and try and put it in context with restoration that could occur in the entire Tualatin Basin, I'm looking at this 1 mile reach as one of probably the top 4 opportunities to really have an impact on salmonid recovery for the Tualatin. So I've been working in the industry for about 40 years now. I'm extremely passionate for restoration because I've spent a long time learning some difficult lessons. Part of the basic assessment that I consider critical for all watersheds is to get a baseline of fish distribution. Let the fish tell the story. So to do that, we're actually snorkeling and counting each one of these different populations. We got a really good sense of where fish were currently using the basin when the conditions are most limiting, the months of late July and August. Those anchor habitats become really important because those are the places that will continue to perform and to produce salmonids in both good years and bad years. But all of those anchor habitats are not performing up to their highest capacity. And this is the place that we wanted to focus our restoration dollars. There are some key things that we have injected into this restoration plan that are critical for what's limiting salmonids in this reach. And I'd have to say probably the most important one is access to thermal refugia. And so a key component of this project was developing off-channel alcoves that are actually spring-fed. They will function both during the summertime for cold water refuge and as off-channel refuge in the wintertime during a flood event. If you have a compelling story for small landowners, they're all on board. We're working on a full suite of property owners that are adjacent in the highest priority section of East Fork Dairy Creek. We're being able to treat the system in a way that has the potential to really make a difference.
The first time I encountered the coho salmon in Plenty Water Creek was about 15 years ago. And there was a huge coho salmon right there in front of me, just like having Discovery Channel right there in my front yard. At first I was a bit apprehensive with a salmon enhancement like this because I thought, oh, they're going to come in and tear everything up. And then I started thinking more and more about it, and I thought, well, what's more important? I mean, the visual of my property for a temporary period, or to take care of these salmon and give them a fighting chance? I think it's worthwhile. It's going to be a great addition to the property. It's just amazing to me that they go from here to Dairy Creek, through the Tualatin River, through the Willamette River, back through the Columbia, and then they make it back 4 or 5 years later.
The fact that they've persisted through all of those things for decades now gives me great hope that a recovery is possible. I think that we're in one of the most important places to be, and I think that we're going to see a response from what we've done.
We're standing here at a large wood placement project that we partnered with the NRCS and some other landowners to execute. This particular site was really a worst case scenario, a long, straight, scoured section of stream all the way down to bedrock with almost no complexity, no place for rest or spawning. And this wood placement structure here is already performing just as intended, collecting gravels, collecting logs and sticks here. A little eddy has created a pool for just the kind of habitat the salmon are looking for. So this was a multi-landowner project. We were lucky enough, and it was really quite rewarding for us to be able to contribute all the logs to this project. This family forest landowner, timber folks will recognize that there's some very high value logs here, in this project that reflects just how rewarding it was for us as a landowner to be able to make this kind of a difference in habitat. You know, it was worth the trade-off for us to donate some really nice wood to this project and to really make a difference, I guess, in the habitat conditions here. It's been great to see this structure perform just as described. In just one winter, we're already collecting gravels and adding complexity to the stream, just as intended.
My mouse has a delay in it, so good. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. So we got some Q&A about this stream stuff, and the first question is kind of an interesting one, and I'll let either of you do it. So 120 years ago, obviously this person's quite old that they remember this, there were beaver dams on every creek and stream. How do you replicate that part of the natural habitat, the beaver dam part?
Well, Julie's the expert here, but I'll say we touch on this a little bit later. That's exactly right. This would have been a beaver environment here, and they would have both contributed to some wood content and created dams and pools that would have formed cold water refugia and places in high water to rest as well. So we replicate those with some parts of this project, several locations on our property and others, and Julie can describe more about that. You'll see more also.
Yeah, I'm Julie. I'm with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. We are one of the partners, funding partners and planning partners for that first restoration project and that first video. And I think Barrett touched on it a little bit in that video about the large woody debris. That's one of the ways we can replicate some of the functions of beaver dams in stream systems. And they did so many different things for the habitat. So in that video, he mentioned habitat complexity and a difference in gravel and stream bottom and difference in temperature and flow. And then also we try to connect to the upper floodplain. And those were all similar things that beaver dams did as well.
Excellent. So while we got you, Julie, what kind of assistance is available through the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District and others around to help people? We learned about the thinning stuff and we'll hear about wildlife stuff, but how about for stream restoration? What kind of assistance is available?
So the Soil and Water Conservation District has several different ways that we can provide assistance to landowners. Stream restoration specifically, there's just technical assistance as well as many different kinds of potential financial assistance. One of them resembles a lot like NRCS, Jessica Wells, what she was talking about, cost share type program. And then we also have a lot of partners in the basin that are interested in investing in increasing the quality of stream habitat. So we have some pretty robust stream programs, and that funding comes from a lot of partners. And in this area in particular, we have a combination of funding that contributed to some revegetation in the stream side area at no cost to the landowner. So it depends on the scenario and what the needs are and the goals are for landowners. So there's not a one-size-fits-all program, but there's different kinds of ways we can help. And I think Brandy Safel was mentioned already. She is our forest conservation specialist at the Soil and Water Conservation District. So we have that as well as other habitat types, including stream enhancement.
All right, excellent. So got one for Barrett. It's a two-parter. How did you decide on your property what segment of stream did you do the restoration in? And then after you've done the restoration, what kind of monitoring do you do to see how effective it is?
Sure. Well, we met with the contractor engineer, basically, who was brought into the project by the Watershed Council and others, Steve Trask, and walked the reach there, and he proposed several of things he thought he had in mind that would work well on the place. And really each of the projects he thought would be of value and really useful were in areas we really wanted to move forward. So that's I guess to get to the bottom line, that's a specialist question as to where they should be and could be, because they have to sustain themselves. They have to endure. There's a great deal of engineering and experience that goes into locating those.
And he was brought in by the Watershed Council, so you didn't have to go find him. The project was there, and you bought into it.
Exactly. So the landowner, ourselves, in this case, we just sat back and learned. We made, there was nothing, no red flags for us, although there certainly could be for if you had your house right on the stream, for example, you may be concerned about stream diversion, a slight, channel adjustments, but there's no concerns for us.
That's why you live on top of the hill, right?
Yeah, right. So Julie, you might speak to monitoring these projects and structures over time.
Yeah. So the engineer and designer was the fish biologist, Steve Trask, in that video. So there were, he completed a couple of snorkel surveys for juvenile salmon in 2013 and 2014. And that was kind of a form of baseline monitoring for this stretch. So there's potential to do that in the future. And other monitoring just includes maybe some temperature monitoring and just observation of juvenile rearing. So there's some structures, some alcoves that were built, and I spoke to one landowner that is kind of documenting what species he's seeing rearing in there and the numbers and such.
All right. Well, thank you both. Julie and I will go away, and Barrett will introduce our next video on wildlife.
Sure. Well, we've got just to tee this up, I'll add to our story. As you heard, it started out as a financial objective, a young family trying to plan for retirement decades down the road, and over time we just gradually added to the kind of values on the table, so to speak, that we'd address with our management plan, starting with recreation, just enjoying the property. And as the shorter term economic value diminished in kind of urgency for us, we started to appreciate more and more the ecosystem services we were able to provide, and the various habitat levers we could pull. And we were lucky to have some great consultants. And this video describes some more about some of the conversations and things we have in place for habitat and wildlife.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Fran Cafferata-Co. I'm a certified wildlife biologist, and I'm OFRI's, Oregon Forest Resources Institute, contract wildlife biologist. We're here today to talk about wildlife in managed forests and the important role that the family forest landowner plays for managing wildlife.
Happy to welcome folks to the Brown Family Tree Farm. Here we've got a chance to talk a little bit about the wildlife considerations, both in our management plan, but more importantly, in kind of the values we've come to appreciate from our tree farm.
One of the things that we really think is important for family forest landowners is to recognize that their property plays a role for wildlife, and every size forest matters for wildlife, and every age forest matters for wildlife. So no matter who you are and what size property you have the opportunity to create habitat for wildlife on your land.
We started out as a young family not really knowing what to expect. This was more of a long-term, maybe a retirement investment for us. And as the forest grew, our understanding grew about what we were able to do with the tree farm beyond just growing wood fiber.
One of the biggest things that landowners can do to provide for wildlife is to keep forest land in forestry. But just owning your property, you're doing a lot for wildlife already, and that's important to feel good about as a landowner. Snags are really important for wildlife, so we ask landowners to leave snags anytime they can. We recognize it can be a safety concern, and so if you have a place where small kids are going to be playing, or other machinery might be in the way, then I understand that. But if you can possibly keep snags across the landscape, we really ask for that. And then downed wood right along with that is really important. So anytime you see those big old stumps or you have a really large downed log, try and keep those where they are and just really make sure that you protect those as you're doing your other management strategies.
Some of the things we've done up here include actually allowing this, as strange as it may seem, a forest pathogen to run its course. We have a few pockets of Phalinus root rot that have been slow enough that we really have not decided to fight it because it's actually contributing snags and down wood at a rate at about what we'd like to see. So along with the snags that we've been left with because of the root rot that we've left, we've got snags that we've intentionally left and marked in various thinning operations. And it's been really rewarding to look and see those snags develop into really special habitat for a variety of woodpeckers. They put on quite a show.
Many of you know about the Oregon Forest Resources Institute and our program for helping landowners manage for wildlife. We have the Wildlife and Managed Forest program. And as part of that, we have the Know Your Forest website. So it's literally just knowyourforest.org. And on there, we put all kinds of publications and materials for landowners. So if you have a question about even managing for band-tailed pigeons, there's a publication on what that looks like. If you're interested in some of the tools and techniques for monitoring wildlife in your property, like how to install a game camera and what are the best ways for doing that, we have information on accomplishing that task. So if you can think of it, we probably have a publication that will answer your questions. Today at the Brown Family Tree Farm, we're going to head down into the woods and talk about a number of different sites and what's being accomplished here for wildlife. And what's cool about this property is it is unique. We have open areas, we have some older timber, some younger timber, a riparian area. So it's going to give us the opportunity to talk about a lot of different things that landowners can do for wildlife when you have these types of resources to work with. So I'm excited to get down in the woods and talk to everybody today.
This stand we're in is about 30 years old, and when we first bought the place, we found it completely overtopped with Scotch broom and blackberries and brush, and over time that developed into kind of a low, early seral stage forest that was pretty active with deer and elk and birds and insects. As this stand developed and it closed over at the canopy level, it really became a less dynamic, less active area, certainly performing habitat functions for certain species, but just not the dynamic kind of complexity that we'd like. So we came in here thinning where we could access the ground efficiently to open up some canopy areas, open up some patches, and select individual hardwoods to try and increase the diversity of this stand. And to where now we see a lot more activity from birds, insects. The deer and elk will hang in here and find something to eat as they move through.
One of the things we like to talk about in any forest operation is how are you intentionally managing for wildlife? And I think thinning is a great time to think about that. And here, this was going to be a pre-commercial thin, and so what do you do with all the slash? So one of the kind of newer concepts we've been trying to talk to people about is piling the slash in an intentional way for wildlife. And so you can do that in a number of different ways, and one thing you can do is you can pile the logs together. So think you're trying to make a large log out of little logs, and the reason we do that is it decays a lot slower, and so it'll last on the landscape longer. Another thing you can do is pile it into a habitat pile. And so a habitat pile is, you think about like a log cabin. So you take the bigger pieces and you stack them together, and then you take the smaller pieces and pile them on top. And so there's a lot of different wildlife that will use these features. Quail will use the habitat pile. Bats will use a habitat pile. When you see them around, even like songbirds will come down and perch on the edge, and then they'll forage and then go back up. Anything that needs a place for cover or to den, we're trying to create those features across the landscape.
The opportunity that thinning buys you is to try and more closely mimic older forest characteristics. This is certainly not an old forest, but by adding the complexity, the open canopy patches, and managing for snags and down wood, you have a chance to kind of mimic some older forest characteristics that benefit wildlife.
So one of the things that the small landowners have the opportunity to do is to manage intentionally for wildlife on their landscape. And we think about the different ages of forest, and we know that young forests are really productive time, not only for the trees, but for wildlife. And older forests get a lot of press too. We know that, those big trees are they're not only are they beautiful, but they're important for wildlife and homes for, cavity nesting birds. And so, but what about this age class in the middle? What about once the trees, close in? And that's such an important time as landowners to make some decisions for wildlife. And so some of the things you can do when you're thinning, you can selectively choose the hardwood trees to leave behind. That's really important for creating biological diversity and food source for wildlife. And then also when you are thinning those trees out, especially in a pre-commercial thin, like the one we're going to do here, then we would pile those specifically for wildlife. Every stage forest has critters that like to live there. That's why it's important to have a mosaic of all different ages of forest across the landscape. So when you have a patch of alder like this, it can be really important for wildlife. It can be an opportunity for creating diversity in the stand. And so, a lot of times we'll recommend leaving it, but we just really want to emphasize the importance of maintaining hardwoods across the landscape and how important that is for wildlife. So
we're in a stand here that when we bought the place would have been seen as just unproductive ground. This type of all hardwood component. We viewed this kind of stand as a patch of weeds, something to eradicate and replace with the rest of our 100% Doug fir planting objectives. As an alder stand, this is certainly kind of a better hangout for hoofed animals as they come through here. So we have that going on. If we do a patch cut here and interplant with this wider space in conifer, that kind of low canopy, younger seral age will be a great habitat for birds and insects and other ground feeding animals for quite a while.
Special sites are a part of any wildlife management or forest management plan, and it can mean anything. And in this instance, the special site is the bluff behind us. And really what that means for wildlife is it's just an area that we'd choose to protect in the wildlife plan. We'd intentionally leave this nice buffer of trees around it. And we recognize that it's different from other places on the forest, and so we want to make sure we protect that. And you think, well, okay, who might be living in the bluff? And you can see that crevice behind me. Maybe there might be a bat roosting in there. There might be some of the salamanders that really use those rocky outcroppings. And then the adjacent forest around here too, it's a little bit older, bigger trees, a lot of cedar. And so we might have things like, red-shouldered hawk might find this place and call it home, or northern flying squirrel. And we did see a Douglas squirrel as we walked in. So there's a number of species that would call this place home. And just because it's so different, we want to make sure we keep it on the landscape just like it is.
So this is one of our highest site ground locations. We're putting on a lot of fiber here every year, and it's a great savings account for us. This is not only putting on a little better than 6% a year in value, so it's a really good performing investment. Because it's putting on this much fiber, it's really a no cost situation to leave snags, or while we're thinning, to manage for snags. So it's not only a wood fiber factory, it's a large wood snag factory for habitat up here.
Today we've been talking about priority actions for wildlife. And here in this 40-year-old stand, there's a lot you can think about for wildlife. And one of the things is to identify your wildlife trees for future management. And one of the things we like to think about is and we talked about the legacy wood and legacy trees that we like to have across the landscape. And so now is a good time to identify which trees those are going to be and mark them as wildlife trees and leave them for future generations. These older stands are awesome, but we also want to have natural openings within the stand. And so as you hike through, you might look for a place where you can have a natural opening and maintain that. Encourage understory growth and encourage those hardwood trees and shrubs. Those are all things that are going to benefit wildlife in the long run.
So behind us is one of the root rot Phalinus pockets we've got on the place, and we're lucky these have moved pretty slowly. So this was about 14 years old when we bought the place, and since then, over the past 30 years, we've lost maybe 10 or 12 trees. So it's something we've decided not to manage in a kind of a traditional silvicultural sense for production purposes. It's really not taking up ground at a very fast rate, but it's contributing snags and pretty good sized down wood at a rate that's really helping here. One of the things we're looking for here is some significant open space to allow a bit of an understory. If we're lucky, we get some good fruit-bearing vegetation that makes a great habitat for example, a fan-tailed pigeon that just flew overhead just now.
You know, there's always going to be winners and losers in wildlife, and so whatever action you take is going to benefit something. So you can feel good about the action that you take. I just would ask that you be intentional about it. So give some thought to what you want to see happen there. So as we're standing here in the riparian zone of the East Fork Dairy Creek, you can see that we have red alder, and we have big leaf maple, and we have Douglas fir trees, and there's a few openings too. And these openings provide a really good opportunity for maybe planting some more conifer species that we know will last a long time and persist across the landscape. So we might encourage a few cedars to grow here. Would be a really great addition to this riparian zone. And then behind me you can see this off-channel habitat area. You might find northwest salamander in here, or Pacific giant salamander. Seeing the logs go across it, we'd call those loafing logs in my world, and those are important if you're trying to encourage turtle. For us, over time, we've appreciated that rather than just a gray zone on the map, a place that's inoperable, we've started to look at these areas for opportunities. This site was largely just marsh ground in what historically would have been alternate river channel or beaver habitat that would have created some cold water resting refugia for salmon. We've come in and replicated that by digging this pond with partnership from our Tualatin River Watershed Council, the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, and OWEB. And this wood placement structure here is already performing just as intended, collecting gravels, collecting logs and sticks here. A little eddy has created a pool for just the kind of habitat the salmon are looking for. It's been a real pleasure to be out here on the Brown family tree farm today talking about wildlife. And as we think about take-home messages, we just want to reiterate that having a mosaic of different habitats across the landscape does really good things for wildlife. Anytime you have a variety and a mosaic, then you're providing for a larger suite of species. So normally we have you all out on the tree farm with us, and we get to tell you about all the resources that are available. So we hope we get to see you all again soon. But in the meantime, we have the new OFRI Wildlife and Managed Forest publication, which is the Forest Says Habitat. And if you're thinking, oh, I've heard about that one before, you have, but we've completely revamped it. So this one talks a lot more about the priority actions for wildlife and how the family forest landowner can make a difference for wildlife. So we encourage everybody to take a look at this publication. And for other resources on how to manage for wildlife, we encourage you to go to the knowyourforest.org.
Back to live action. And here's Barrett, and here's Fran. You guys are awesome. So there are a number of questions about this one, and some of them you covered, but I'd like to ask them anyway just to reiterate it. So the first one is about the habitat piles, Fran. A lot of people are interested in that. And can you tell us again what species of wildlife use those piles? And kind of a twist on that, are there different things to do to a habitat pile to maybe favor one species over another?
Absolutely. I'm glad I got a chance to answer this question live. You know, the answer, of course, is it depends for habitat piles and what species are going to use them. But in fact, even NCASI is starting a study to look at how they might be used by predator and prey species down in Southern Oregon. So that's pretty exciting. We're waiting for those results. But in general, they'll be used by songbirds. You might get voles in there, chipmunks, salamanders, lizards, bats, snakes, insects. So a wide variety use them. We kind of use the terms interchangeably, wildlife, or habitat pile and bioden. And you can kind of think of it as biodens being bigger with the bigger chunks, like you almost think, oh, I think that's a firewood pile, but it's not, it's a bioden. And then the habitat piles are the ones that you've seen in the video, which have those kind of smaller thinning slash and then the material piled on top. And the way I think of it is those bigger biodens, you might get like a bear or coyote or, you know, some of those bigger species in there, and the habitat spot piles are going to be smaller species.
All right. So one for Barrett. This has to do with the timing of the thinning, with the season of the year, both in terms of the trees and in terms of the wildlife. What's the best time to do your thinning? You're muted. You pulled a mic there.
So you're really looking for a couple of things on the thinning season. You're just looking for durability in your standing trees. When the sap is running heavy in the spring and to early summer, you can bump a Doug fir tree with your shoulder and peel the bark off. Whereas when the buds are hardened, you know, in the late fall through before spring starts, you know, you can hit them pretty hard in comparison. Also with hardwoods, you want to avoid having that tonnage, all those fuels you're bringing down in the leaf component. So, you know, stay away from a really high growth time of the year. On the wildlife standpoint, I'm not aware of seasonal considerations there. Fran, do you have anything to add about the optimal seasons for thinning?
Yeah, if your thinning operation is purely for wildlife, then I would say you want to avoid thinning during the nesting season for birds, because you're going to have the highest chance of disturbing those and even destroying nests at that time. So you'd want to avoid that spring and early summer and push it to the fall if you can, although I know that can conflict with other timing considerations.
Okay, excellent. So this relates back to one that we had earlier on the stream one about beaver. Can you bring in beaver, or in lieu of bringing them in, what do you do to the habitat to make it so that the beaver will want to be there?
I'm glad we brought up beaver again. So one thing I want to mention is that we do have a beaver publication by OFRI. So again, it's at that knowyourforest.org, and there's a lot of information on beaver there. And one of the things you'll learn if you read that publication is about the dam building. And you might be surprised to learn that not all beavers build dams. In fact, one of the main reasons they build them at all is just to avoid predators. And so it's kind of a common misconception thinking that though beaver dams are really important for a lot of other species, the beaver doesn't do it for the other species. It does it for itself, and they only do it if they have to. In terms of bringing them in, there are beaver transplant programs where they move them around, but we don't recommend it because anytime you're moving wildlife, it can be one of the studies out of Oregon State, when they tried to do that, relocating beavers, they found that they were often just food for coyotes or bobcats, that just tasty treats because they were dropped into these new areas and then they don't know they move around too much and then they get eaten by predators. So that's not great, but to encourage them on your landscape, which I think is what the question was more about. So they need constant source of water and they need food. And so if you have both of those things, those fresh new shoots that beavers like, then there's a better chance that they'll show up on your property. But where the beavers go is kind of up to the beavers.
Fair. So you mentioned legacy trees in the stand that you were in, that you want to leave legacy trees for the future and you'd choose them. So what characteristics do you look for from a legacy trees? And how does Barrett feel about having you take his biggest and best trees and making him not cut them down? So it's a two-parter. So you go first, Fran. What's the characteristics?
Okay. So look for those low value trees at the mill. So I want the ones with the great big limbs and lots of them, the big wolfy trees. So if you have something like that, then just keep it, or leftover, from the previous harvest. There might already be an old big stump out there, the ones that they're decaying. And, if you were to peek into one, I'm sure you'd see a salamander living in there, maybe an encentina or something. And so those are the ones to leave. And then if you're identifying one, like in Barrett's case, where I want him to leave it for the future, again, it might not be big yet, but I want to find one that's already got some decay or deformities and leave those. So I'm not looking for your biggest and best trees.
All right.
Yeah, I have to add, unless you have a, a timber factory, with an incredible amount of uniformity and planted in rows, you're going to have options. You're going to have trees that are commercially defect trees, or that's rarely comes into conflict with the rest of our objectives.
Excellent. So one more, and this has to do for Fran again. You mentioned planting some cedar. So how do you decide to bring in a species that's not on the site versus just going with what's there? I don't know that Barrett ever had any cedar, and now you're going to bring some in. What if you wanted to bring in a weedy thing for wildlife? How do you make the decision on what species you can bring in?
Well, that's a great question. In Barrett's case, I think there was some cedar along that stream, just not right where we were standing. And so we definitely look around and see what else is already occurring there. And so I would always recommend bringing in a diversity of species that are known to occur in that area. And then in terms of, I think you said weedy, but I'm hoping what you were trying to lead me into is a wildlife friendly seed mix, which is one of my huge things that I like to talk about a lot. And especially with all those forest fires that we just had everywhere, I'm really working with landowners to think about wildlife friendly seed mixes for all that fire line that's been built. But in the case of this riparian area, we could think about a riparian specific wildlife friendly seed mix to put in some of those openings. It would be really beneficial.
All right. Maybe stuff that would favor pollinators and such.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Well, great. I'm going to ask Fran to go away. I'm going to go away, and Barrett is going to introduce our last video about recreation.
Sure. I think as I hand it off, I will deal with a couple of questions here, Mike, if I can indulge you for a second here. There's a question about what age to recommend pre-commercial thinning. That's a very complex, it's one of those questions that the answer is it depends. Generally you'll need to learn about crown percentage and watch that. So follow up with any of us afterwards on that question. And income from thinning, we have one of the best haul distances imaginable to a pulp mill, and at really good pulp rates, it's still just paid for the delivery of those logs. So other than the firewood that you're willing to invest your time in, very tough to get income from a pre-commercial scale thinning. So moving on to this really brief video of some of the recreation values here. Hopefully this will be interesting. Go ahead, Mike. We bought the farm as a timber land investment, and gradually we started to really appreciate the recreation value here. We put in a few trails by hand to try and get to special spots we found. Like on everybody's property, you may have either a vista, a view, or even a special tree that you want to be close to. These trails really paid off, and we now I think have close to 5 miles of trail on the property here. Access to trails is the kind of a restorative resource that really rejuvenates you. There's nothing like coming home from work or being in traffic and getting on a trail, take your mind off of everything. And we're lucky here to have enough interesting, just beautiful forest to travel through that, we have even friends who right now are very stressed out, stuck at home. They can come out here with their families and walk around. It's been really great. On your own property, you may have a stream you want to get to, or a view to look at. And so you would just simply start with what we call a positive and negative control points, places you want to be or have to be, or maybe there are places you want to stay away from, either a sensitive habitat site or a cliff that's hard to deal with. So once you've got those positive control points, you just try and find a way to fit it into the landscape in a fun and interesting way. And anything but transportation. These recreation trails are meant to be fun to walk on, not just to get from point A to point B. after a lifetime of volunteer coordination and kind of recreation, land use planning work as a volunteer, I just wanted to make sure that new trail construction and maintenance of old trails was done in a way that still left behind a hand-built looking trail, and you know, it just was not that fun to walk on large, wide, machine-built trails. So not having the tool I wanted to do that with, I just had a moment of temporary insanity and decided to invent this machine, a narrow, really powerful machine that once it had been through, it looked like the trail had been built by hand. So it was a super rewarding project, and able to meet a lot of people and do projects all over the country, both consulting and constructing. It's been really fun. So the machine is basically a mini dozer with a variable width. So it's, at its narrowest, it's only 24 inches wide, which for a 5,000-pound machine is unusual. And a variable track width, so it can be as wide as 36 inches for a little more stability. And in the front, it's got a 6-way dozer blade. Over the top of that blade is a hoe with a bucket and thumb for the heavy grubbing work. Additionally, it's a full-time radio-controlled machine, so whether you're in the seat or out of the seat, you're wearing a remote control harness, so that the moment you think you might be a little unsafe or unsteady, you can just step out of the machine and operate remotely, just because obviously you want to be as safe as possible in these kind of conditions. It's always a little scary, and it's amazing how slow you work when you're afraid of dying. Getting off the machine, usually you spot the fact that it's not that dangerous. You can just kind of keep building.
All right, you caught me asleep at the wheel there. So we had a couple questions, but I know you have a demonstration you want to go into first, Barrett. So
sure. So
do your demo, and then we'll go to the questions.
Okay, yeah. So this kind of flowed into a quick demonstration of the Google Earth Pro again, and we'll which, because it also picks up some of our recreation resources. So we'll share screen here and switch back, excuse me, to Google Earth. So as you can see on the left of this window here, we've got a tree of folders which contain the various GPS data and other notes I've collected. And I should say that there are a lot of different programs, applications for handling, you know, layers of information about your farm. Google Earth Pro is just one, as pluses and minuses. I'm no expert, but we'll start turning things on and off here, and I'll show you what we've got. So the property boundary is, I'll check and uncheck that layer, that feature within the boundary folder. I'll turn on the four-wheel drive car roads, for example. So these are all roads on the property you could drive with, say, a Subaru, you know, not a street car necessarily, but a car with four-wheel drive. Turn off those roads, open up the streams folder, and turn on all the streams on the property. So what we've got are these locations. Say this north stream, I'll select that one. And we've got a note here that describes it as a small perennial type N stream that feeds the North Beach habitat pond. So that's one of the pond structures we built, for example. These data points here are the culvert locations on the property. So this is a culvert, 12-inch, 12-inch, 16, 24-inch. We'll leave that stream layer turned on, and turn on the cultural sites layer. There's not much here except for a couple of historic dump sites from when this was part of a huge logging community called Snooseville, and an original home site that last evidence existed I think in the 50s. Special sites, we've got spots where we've we've identified, you'll see here, and we've also got individual special trees located here and there. And this will go up to our trails folder and turn on the trail network here. So the colors are, different depictions for our own use, but these are various recreation trails. And if you've got, I can either export this to a GPS, a simple free GPS viewer that you can carry on your phone on the property. So we can send folks out onto the property by themselves with their phone and track themselves as they walk these trails. And the placards that go with these trails are GPS data that shows up on your phone as well. That's about all I wanted to show you in Google Earth here. It's very interesting for trails, but it's also a kind of a tribal knowledge data collector for you as well. I mean, if I'm bug out and or get on a ship to Mars or get hit by a bus, somebody's going to be able to pull up this utilities layer. And because only I remember where this buried utility line is and where the phone splices are, for example. So this just is a data-rich kind of package that exists graphically for recreation and other uses. So I think that's about it.
That's neat. So one of the things that I think we've got Barrett talked into is giving one of our Washington County Small Woodlands workshops on how to use Google Earth. And that I think would be a really cool thing because he's got it down really, really well. But just a couple of questions about recreation, then I'm going to turn it over to Vic to wrap us up. So I've often wondered, when I see your moniker on your email, it's Barrett-single track. And I thought, what does this mean, this single track stuff? And then I saw the demonstration of your machine and I say, oh yeah, that gets it. So tell us a little bit about both the machine, do you use it for other people? Do you make them and sell them? Or is this just one of a kind and you're famous because you have it?
No, thanks for that. It was, we built these machines and sold them around the world. It was a long project of 3 years straight in just engineering and teaching myself what I needed to learn to tackle this thing. And, it was, like I said, very rewarding. I was able to change a lot of the way people viewed trails, but in the end, these things have to pencil out too. It was not a brilliant business decision. So we put that to bed in about 2014 and no longer build those. We just kind of support folks out there who need a hand with parts. And otherwise, I just use it on my place and as a volunteer tool in the places I recreate on public land.
Excellent.
So far, someday maybe. In fact, we may be volunteering on the demonstration, Madison Demonstration Forest as part of their recreation goals there.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Way cool. So the next question is with the people, it looked like mostly the recreation that was happening on your tree farm was you guys and friends, but I see tree farm and I see motorbike and right away, I think liability and that kind of stuff. So, so how do you deal with that on your tree farm with recreation?
Well, I'll try and be as brief as I can, but Oregon is lucky to have one of the strongest recreation immunity statutes in the country, and that intends to encourage recreation access to all lands, public and private. And as long as you're not charging a fee, as long as the landowner's not charging a fee for access, you're immune from negligence claims on that property. But not gross willful negligence. If you're intending to try and harm somebody, you'll be sued successfully. But if you dig a hole and don't put a cover over the hole, or you put a gate up and you don't put a reflector on it, you're immune from what might be a worrisome negligence suit. Again, that's to encourage access for hunting, walking, fishing and so on. So
Excellent.
that's the liability answer there.
Well, thank you so much, Barrett and Susan. This has been terrific. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Anything you want to say before I turn it over to Vic to do the wrap up? Join us, Vic, while he's thinking.
No, I think, like I said, I just feel lucky to have had a chance to maybe bring this group of folks together on a video so some people can maybe learn some things. And I hope that it's been useful, and thanks for coming to join us.
Thank you. Take it away, Vic.
Yeah, thanks, Barrett. Thanks, to the Browns for making this event happen, and all the work that they put in. We definitely see the fruits of your labor. And thank you all for participating in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed getting to know the property and some of the topics we talked about. I'm sure a lot of learning was done tonight. OSWA is currently working on another video of Yamhill County's Tree Farmer of the Year, and that should be ready in the late October timeframe. So if you enjoyed this one, you will definitely want to keep an eye on OSWA.org's website for information, marketing material related to that Tree Farmer of the Year presentation. That one will cover clear-cut logging on a small parcel, replacing a culvert to make it fish passable, reforestation challenges with animal damage and drought, and also another look at thinning on that property. So in the meantime, this video has been recorded and it should soon be available on the OSWA.org website, the Oregon Tree Farm System, and OFRE's website, knowyourforest.org. And also the original videos are going to be available if you'd like to take a look at those.
They're much better.
And they will be on OSWA's YouTube channel.
Excellent.
And so if you're not currently an OSWA or Oregon Tree Farm System member, and the information that's been presented this evening is interesting, if you're interested in learning more about those organizations, you can find membership information and membership applications on those websites. So feel free to take a look at that. For the Washington County chapter, we have monthly meetings that are usually about an 30 to 45 minute presentation from a specific topic like NRCS. And our next meeting is October 28th at 7:00 p.m. And Brandy Saffel from Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District will be sharing information on some of the projects they've been involved with in Washington County. So we don't have any information posted on our website yet about that, but that will show up in the next couple of weeks at WCSWA.com. That's our Washington County chapter's website. So thanks once again, especially to the Browns for making this event happen, to our panelists for participating in all the work that they put in, and the sponsors, Oregon Forest Resources Institute, OSU Extension, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Tualatin River Watershed Council, Oregon Department of Forestry, Sustainable Forest Initiative, and our own Washington County chapter. Thanks again, and we hope to see you again soon.
All right. Good job, Vic. Thank you, everybody. And have a good evening. Stay dry. Last words, Barrett?
No. Good night, all. Thanks for joining.
Good night.